Ahead, legal whiplash, back and forth rulings from the nation's highest courts whether the state's new immigration law should take effect. We were there when Governor Greg Abbott heard about one ruling, and he dismissed criticism that Latinos will be unfairly targeted.
That's just a false narrative by people who never wanted to see the law go into effect.
Side by side, Texas House Speaker Dade Phelan, who's fighting for his political career, appears with Governor Abbott publicly and reacts to the fact that the governor has not endorsed him for re-election.
I'm not in any way disappointed at all.
Presidential visit. President Joe Biden raises millions of dollars in Dallas. Why one of his key supporters in the city says his re-election campaign is fundraising and advertising earlier than normal. Good Sunday morning to you. I'm Jack Fink. Get your fix for Texas politics. Eye on Politics starts now. Hello and welcome to Eye on Politics. I hope you're having a great weekend so far. Another busy week of Texas politics making national headlines. Talk about March Madness. We begin with the legal whiplash at our nation's highest courts involving the new state law, SB 4, that allows state and local law enforcement to arrest, prosecute, and deport migrants for crossing into Texas illegally. Here's the timeline. At the beginning of the week, the state's law was not in effect. Then, around 1 p.m. Tuesday, the U.S. Supreme Court allowed the legislation to take effect and sent the case back to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans to fully consider it. Then, just 8 hours later at 9:45 Tuesday night, the Fifth Circuit blocked the law, meaning it was no longer in effect. To understand why there was so much back and forth, you have to go back in time. On February 29th, federal district judge David Ezra blocked SB 4, saying it was unconstitutional. The very next day, March 1st, after the state appealed, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals filed an administrative stay and reversed Judge Ezra's ruling without explanation and allowed the Texas law to go into effect while it considered whether it's constitutional. I spoke with David Cole, an appellate attorney in Dallas who's not related to the case.
And so that did a 180 without really explaining why we'd done the 180. And people began to go to the Supreme Court and file all sorts of requests for more guidance there to just sort of understand where they stood. If the Fifth Circuit had simply said, let's just keep it where it is, nothing's going to change what Judge Ezra said until we can get full briefing that we consider ourselves, it would have been a much smoother run of things in these last couple of weeks.
The Fifth Circuit is set to hold a hearing April 3rd, but the case could go back to the Supreme Court before then, depending on what happens. Governor Greg Abbott, who has championed the state law, was campaigning in Rockwall when the Supreme Court allowed the Texas law to take effect Tuesday afternoon. A staffer handed him a note, and he shared the news with the hundreds of Republicans in the crowd.
Texas can begin enforcing the immigration law.
We interviewed the governor exclusively, and at the time, he said he was encouraged.
Oh, yeah.
Why? What do you think this signals?
What it signals is there are 6 votes on the Supreme Court that say it's okay for Texas to go ahead and begin enforcing the law. And so that's a very consequential step that's been taken. It's not conclusive, but it's consequential for now. And so first thing I'm going to do is get back and talk to the leaders of the Texas Department of Public Safety, leaders of the National Guard, as well as local law enforcement, and make sure we're all in sync together about exactly how this is going to be enforced.
Right, because what we've heard is there haven't been any protocols set up just yet. Is that true?
Well, that's not really true, because let me tell you this, and that is, one thing DPS does constantly, they're constantly working on protocols. Another thing that is, I've had many conversations with the director of the Texas Department of Public Safety, Steve McCraw, about what the right protocols are to make sure we will be able to enforce this appropriately. But then the last thing is this. What the Texas law does, it codifies in the state of Texas what Congress has codified in the United States. And that's arresting people coming across the border illegally, detain them, jail them, which is authorized by congressional law already. So all Texas is going to be doing is basically enforcing the laws that were passed by Congress that Joe Biden is refusing to enforce.
Now, let me ask you, because you've heard the current concerns and the criticisms that this is going to be, show me your papers, and also you're going to be basically picking people out because they're Latino, the color of their skin, etc.
Jack, that's just a false narrative by people who never wanted to see the law go into effect. The facts of the matter are these. One is that we're going to be right there at the border. The way you catch people coming across the border illegally is at the border. And know the definition of illegal. It's illegal to cross the border between a port of entry. If they want to cross legally, they could go to one of the 28 ports of entry that we have. Second thing, remember this. We're getting people from more than 150 different countries across the world. People who say that we're going to be targeting Latinos, that's completely ignorant about the people and where they're coming from. As you know, we're getting a lot of people from China. We're getting people from Russia. We're getting people from the Middle East. We're getting people from continents across the entire globe. So there's no one particular race or group that is set apart than any other.
Critics of the law say state and local law enforcement aren't equipped to handle immigration enforcement. Fernando Garcia is the executive director of the Border Network for Human Rights.
These police officers that are supposed to implement as before, they don't have a minute of training on how the immigration law works and which documents work or not work. For us, this is an illegal and unconstitutional law. And in the basis of this law is essentially a racist, discriminatory version of Texas.
More than 600 migrants are now in a federal detention facility. This after more than 100 of them broke through a razor wire fence and pushed past Texas National Guard troops at the Texas-Mexico border in El Paso Thursday. Customs and Border Protection says any migrant with no legal basis to remain in the U.S. is subject to removal and cannot apply for admission for 5 years. Governor Greg Abbott says authorities in El Paso regained control and reinforced the barrier. Now to Texas House Speaker Dade Phelan, who's fighting to save his political career at the Texas Capitol. He's in the May 28th runoff against challenger David Covey, who's backed by Attorney General Ken Paxton, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, and former President Donald Trump. If he wins the runoff, he will face a challenge to remain in his role at the Capitol. Republican Representative Dr. Tom Oliverson of Cypress near Houston has announced he will run for Speaker in January.
It became clear to me that the status quo is too dysfunctional to continue, and a change from top to bottom is needed.
House members will select the Speaker after they are sworn in. In Dallas, for an event early last week, Speaker Phelan spoke with reporters about his primary runoff battle.
I've delivered on conservative policies. No one can deny that. No one can objectively deny that I've not delivered on conservative policies.
You're in a bruising campaign right now. How confident are you that you're going to make it through a runoff, and that if you do, that you'll still be selected as Speaker?
Well, I'm extremely confident. That's why I'm in the race. And I've got a path to victory. I know what my path is, and we're going to execute on it. And my discussions with my House colleagues, from not just the primary, but since the primary, almost on a daily basis, I feel very confident about the next session, being Speaker of the Texas House.
Speakers here today, which includes Speaker Phelan.
It was the first time in months that Phelan had appeared side by side with Governor Abbott. It came at a news conference at UT Dallas about a public-private partnership for manufacturing semiconductor chips. Abbott has stayed on the sidelines in the Speaker's primary and has not endorsed him nor Covey.
So no, I'm not in any way disappointed at all. Those are the big three. And typically we stay out of each other's races. That's been the tradition here in the state of Texas. Of course, the Lieutenant Governor decided not to follow that tradition. He crossed that Rubicon, and that's his issue going forward with the Texas House.
65 Democrats, block vote. They pick the Republican that will give them the most. This happens to be Dade Phelan.
For months now, the Attorney General has campaigned against and criticized Phelan for allowing the investigation and impeachment against him to take place in the House. Phelan said he has no regrets, and he took a parting shot at Paxton.
And I will say this, I go to bed every night very proud of the courage of my convictions. I think Mr. Paxton, at the end of the day, is just going to have convictions.
As for the Attorney General, he will be back in a Houston courtroom Tuesday. There's a pretrial conference on the felony state fraud charges he has faced for 9 years. His trial is set for next month. Coming up, President Joe Biden raised millions of dollars during fundraisers in Dallas and Houston. Why one of his key supporters said his campaign has started fundraising and advertising earlier. And then later, Republican State Senator Brian Hughes responds to Democrats who are trying to make abortion rights a campaign issue this fall. Eye on Politics. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Eye on Politics. President Joe Biden raised millions of dollars for his re-election campaign in Texas last week, including Dallas. He landed at DFW International Airport aboard Air Force One. CBS News quotes a source familiar as saying the Biden-Harris campaign raised close to $7 million during 2 fundraisers in Dallas Wednesday evening and 1 fundraiser in Houston on Thursday. The president did not hold any public appearances in the Lone Star State. Before coming to Texas, he held public campaign events in Arizona and Nevada, 2 battleground states. We spoke with Regina Montoya of Dallas, a co-chair of the Women's Leadership Forum at the Democratic National Committee. She told us why the president's campaign started fundraising and advertising sooner than normal and why it was important for her to be a co-host of one of the fundraisers.
I want to be sure that everyone hears the message of President Biden and his achievements. And the way we can do that is that we are able to get the messaging out. And some of the, that's already occurring for Latinos con Biden, for example, that just got launched in Arizona by the president. There is already a media buy, and people are going to be hearing about the extraordinary achievements of this president.
One of the things that you have been telling me is just how early this is for having so many fundraisers and so many efforts for a presidential re-election campaign. What do you mean by that?
Usually, you wait almost until the convention. And after the convention, which this year is in August in Chicago, that's normally when you would see it. People are starting to pay attention in September, October. They're seeing the election coming up in a few months, but not this year. It has started much, much earlier with media campaigns, media buys, where the campaign is actually buying advertising to get that message out. So this is a much earlier one.
Why is this happening, though? I mean, so early. Is it because, I mean, for months now we've seen the polls, and it shows that Mr. Biden, President Biden, is behind former President Donald Trump.
I think for people recognizing we know what the race is going to look like, let's start tuning in and let's start seeing who really is going to help us.
And how do you think the president will be able to reverse some of these polling trends that we've seen, you know, nationally and then in these battleground states?
The important part is the president is getting his message out to the community. Where is he now? He's in Arizona and Nevada, states that not necessarily even his opponent has been in this year, particularly in Arizona. So he is out there absolutely taking nothing for granted, out in all of these states, coming to Texas, you know, visiting with some of his top supporters. That's who he is, and he is working hard.
Reproductive rights is certainly one issue that the Biden-Harris campaign has really hit hard on. Why is that so important to his re-election campaign?
When women are recognized that their rights have been taken away, and the perfect example was at the State of the Union, at least a couple of women from Texas who have found themselves in dire predicaments with pregnancies that were never going to happen as a result of an ectopic pregnancy, as an example, that created health issues for them, and then discovered that in their own state they weren't going to be able to have the kind of health care they need. People are starting to see that it's not someone far, far away that this is affecting. It's affecting people we know. It's affecting our daughters. It's affecting our, people that we see every day. And I think that has really been something that the Biden administration has recognized, that we have to be there for women and that we have to support women's rights for reproductive health and health in general.
Denton had a front row seat to a congressional hearing. That's because on Monday, the U.S. House Ways and Means Committee discussed access to emergency medical services in rural areas. They heard from first responders and North Texans about challenges they've faced. North Texas Congresswoman Beth Van Dyne says many medical professionals often feel tied down by over-regulation.
What they want to be able to do is treat a patient. They want to be able to actually talk to a patient. And what they find is because of all the regulations, they're spending a lot more of their time on a keyboard and in front of a screen than they are in front of face-to-face to a patient.
There's healthcare deserts throughout this country, a lot in Texas, and looking on how we can have policy items that can help address access so that every American, regardless of the zip code that they live in, that they get quality health care.
Van Dyne says these types of field hearings are important to put a face to the issue. Coming up, we speak one-on-one with Republican State Senator Brian Hughes of Tyler, who responds to Democrats making abortion rights a campaign issue this fall. We'll be back in a moment.
On Tuesday, the Supreme Court is set to hear oral arguments in the battle over access to mifepristone, a pill used in more than half of U.S. abortions. The FDA approved mifepristone in 2000, but last year, a group of doctors and medical groups opposed to abortion challenged that approval, arguing that the protocol is unsafe. Despite being illegal in states like Texas, some patients have been able to get medication abortions through telehealth services and by receiving pills by mail. More than a dozen states have passed so-called abortion shield laws to protect telehealth providers who prescribe medication abortion pills to patients in states where abortion is illegal. These kind of laws explicitly state that state officials and agencies won't assist another state's efforts to look into or punish such providers. Abortion opponents see the laws as a bold infringement on state sovereignty.
On Friday, the Texas Medical Board proposed a definition of a medical emergency for a woman to have an abortion. Under state law, the only exception for allowing the procedure is if the mother's life is at risk. More than 20 women have sued the state, saying the law is vague when it comes to what a medical emergency means, and that doctors haven't performed abortions because they're unsure whether they're legal. It comes after Kate Cox and Dr. Austin Denard, both of Dallas, had to leave Texas to have an abortion after having troubled pregnancies not compatible with life. Both women attended the State of the Union address. President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, and Democrats are making abortion rights a key part of their campaign and want to pass a law codifying Roe v. Wade, which the Supreme Court overturned 2 years ago. We spoke with Republican State Senator Brian Hughes of Tyler about this issue.
Nationally and here, I don't blame Democrats for looking for something they can win on, because I don't want to be too partisan, but folks are concerned about inflation. They're concerned about the crisis at the southern border. So there's not a whole lot of winning issues for our Democratic friends these days. And I understand this is what they want to talk about, but we're glad to have a discussion because this is important. And you mentioned the life of the mother, and I'm glad you did. As you know, there's been some confusion and maybe intentional obfuscation of the law in Texas. If a mother's life is in danger, if her health is at risk, she is protected. And we've even passed a law last session to further clarify that. So, and you didn't mention that, but I want to make sure people do know that. There have been doctors and a few hospitals confused about that, but Texas law is clear. The life of the mother, the health of the mother is paramount. And if there's a danger there, she is protected and can move forward if she wants to. That's clear.
As you know, there have been cases that have made national headlines. Kate Cox of Dallas. I interviewed another woman, Dr. Austin Denard, and she had a similar situation, troubled pregnancy, and they had to flee Texas, in their words, to get an abortion. And so I'm wondering, what do you make of that? Is that right? Do there need to be exceptions made in these kinds of cases?
It's an important question a lot of people are asking about, and to those moms, they should not have to go through what they have. We have some doctors and some hospitals who are either misunderstanding the law, misapplying the law. I can't tell you why. I hope they're not playing politics and trying to make hard cases that aren't necessary. But to be clear, if a woman's life is in danger, if her health is in danger, a major bodily function, she has the right in Texas to go forward with an abortion. And let me just say with deep respect to those medical providers, to those doctors, to those hospitals, if a pregnant mother presents with an ectopic pregnancy, for example, she must be treated. Texas law explicitly provides for treatment in those cases. That's one example.
And I just wanted to go back and ask you briefly about the situation with this Dr. Austin Dennard, and she's part of the lawsuit. As you know, that the state Supreme Court now is still considering.
Right.
And in her case, because I asked if her life was in jeopardy, and she said at the time it was not. And so because of that, she had to leave the state.
If the question is the condition of the child, we heard so much testimony from parents, and I bet people watching this have either had this experience or have friends where the doctor said, this child's not going to make it, and today the child is out playing basketball and is living a normal life, or maybe living a life with a handicap, but living a life that is valued. And so in those cases in Texas, if it's about the child's condition, unless the child is in a situation where they're not going to make it, then abortion does not happen in those cases in Texas.
And before we go, we want to say congratulations to Dallas County Judge Clay Jenkins, whose wife just had twins, a boy and a girl, and he tells us they are all doing well. We wish them well. That's all for Eye on Politics this week. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jack Fink. I am listening, and we are listening at CBS News Texas. Hope to see you again next week. And from all of us, enjoy the rest of your weekend.